But I think we're going to be happy. Whatever God has for us, I'm sure it's better than what we have right now. It's not like, well, sorry, there's one catch to heaven. You're single forever. You're single for eternity. So obviously when we...
Hello and welcome to Select and Reflect, a movie review podcast. What we do here is we take films that have come out recently, but not too recently, and look at what we think about them now that the cinema and the theatrical fanfare has gone away. Are they still worth looking at? Do they still hold up? Is there more we can learn from them? I'm Michael, and I'm joined with my co-host, Luke. And Luke,
guys.
What are we reviewing today?
Today we are reviewing Get Out, the Jordan Peele movie that came out on February 24, 2017, so almost a year ago. Had a budget of $4.5 million, but raked in over $250 million at the box office. Very impressive.
Very cool. It's a reference. Yeah, I think it was... I mean, obviously, I guess you know who Jordan Peele is and his whole kind of... Do you?
Yes, I know. Key and Peele.
Yeah. On that note, actually, I was kind of worried going into this film because it said it was going to be a comedy, a horror comedy, and I don't love Key and Peele style comedy. I find it... I mean, it's... I'm not going to say I never laughed at it. Yeah, I think for me it was okay. And the problem is I was worried going into this that there'd be too many kind of, it's, too obvious a joke and it's not funny. Like, I don't mind things not being funny, but I don't like when you can tell it's trying to be funny and it isn't. But
yes.
We'll get into those things in a minute. Did you like it, Luke?
I did like it. I did like it a lot, Michael.
I also liked it. I was kind of expecting that you would like it, but I was wondering if there was going to be a massive disagreement right off the bat. But no, good. Okay, yeah, we do both like it, and we are going to be talking about it in a lot of detail here, I imagine. In fact, I imagine, just the thought, this may be possibly a very long podcast compared to possibly others, because I think there is a lot to discuss here.
Well, that's why we picked it, because it is a movie that contains so much. And obviously, I think it was one of the most talked about movies of 2017, possibly the most talked about. So yeah, it's a good movie to have a really large discussion about.
Yes, I did like it, and I suppose it's worth having a brief discussion about what actually happened. The film stars... there was one actor I did recognise right off the bat, which was Alison Williams. I know her. I'm ashamed to admit, but I know her for one reason, because she stars in Lena Dunham's HBO series Girls.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if she's... I've only seen one episode of that show and I didn't like it. But I saw her in that. And she stars in, or has starred in, several internet comedy videos. So I suppose I recognise her, but I imagine that she is not she's not an A-list celebrity. And
yes.
The other guy, and I looked up his name. His name is something...
It's Daniel Kaluuya.
I was going to say Kaluuya.
I'm pronouncing that wrong, probably.
Yes, and I did not recognise him. I think I recognised the mother, but I didn't... Well, I wouldn't be able to tell you who she was. And of course that is quite common for horror films. Obviously horror films, they usually do not use A-list actors.
Yes.
I think the only horror film I can think of recently that used an A-list actor was World War Z, which is a terrible film, but I think that's possibly one of the highest budget horror films, World War Z. But I mean, the thing is, nowadays it's becoming increasingly, horror films are becoming big business. But I guess historically and to this day, a horror film is kind of a good, safe directorial debut, because there's this association with horror films that they're easier in a way. Because if you want to make a good comedy, you have to be really funny. If you want to make a good drama, they have to be really emotionally engaging. But there is this idea with horror films that you just need jump scares, gore. You don't need good actors. One thing I did like about this film, in a way, is that it was not gory, and it wasn't too jump scary. There was, and this did annoy me to no end, a jump scare noise. It was when he walks out at night. He's walking along, and this woman walks behind him, and you hear that noise, and it's oh, and I hated that they did that. And it's one of those things where it's just I would have, but I did like that. Apart from that, there weren't any jump moments, and I also liked that it wasn't gory. I think the thing was the idea was inherently kind of disturbing, because it was people being body snatched and kind of being stuck in their passive bodies, being a passenger to someone else's, and that is kind of a scary idea. And it's kind of funny actually, because the first scene in the film, just to get us slightly back on discussing the plot, a guy gets kidnapped, you find out. Now, when I first watched it, I assumed that guy was being killed, and I was like, oh, that sucks, he's dead. The weird thing is, later on,
Can I just point out in that first scene, like he doesn't see the guy who's 5 feet away walking towards him until the last second.
That is,
like he's got no peripheral vision at all.
I think there are about 3 moments in the film at least where someone has no peripheral vision. During his escape at the end, there are several moments where you think surely they'd see him coming, but they think. I mean, I would say a lot of that falls under standard horror movie problems.
I know.
It does not.
It's difficult.
It does not escape. One of the other things I noticed on the subject of standard horror movie problems is that I've seen several reviews, because I did watch a few other reviews of this, and a lot of people were kind of saying like, oh, everyone's so kind of incredulous to the idea that this would actually happen. And I think in reality, if you saw all this creepy stuff happening, you would probably be like, I want to get out of here right away. But obviously the way horror films work, people naturally have to be more like, oh, maybe, yes, it seems like everyone's completely insane, but I better stick around.
We'll get into that more, I think, later.
Yes.
Because there's a whole... this isn't actually a horror film, it's also a commentary on...
Yes, I did want to... Yes. But, one of the things... Obviously, you see this guy, you assume he's dead. You find out later on he is alive, but he is... The bulk of his brain's been removed, and his body is being, piloted by someone else. And I thought, that's possibly a fate worse than death, I think. I would be willing to say that, that just sucks.
Yes, I agree.
So it is, there's that kind of horrific element to it, which I did kind of appreciate. I think one of the other things that I liked about this film is that, and I didn't notice, well, I noticed it a bit the first time watching it, I noticed it a lot more second time, is there is actually a lot of foreshadowing in this film.
That is true.
There's I think the things that I noticed myself were, there's the deer gets run over, and he walks out and he goes to look at the deer, and his girlfriend, Alison Williams, Rose, is like, oh, don't come back, don't do it. And I wrote in my notes the first time I watched it, why is she so scared of this deer? And what I found out later is, of course, his mum was killed in a hit and run accident. So when they're kind of playing up this moment where it's like it's a deer and it's dead, and you're like, what is this? It's kind of setting up this whole, oh, he's sad about something being run over, maybe. And on a similar, actually, they tell the dad about the deer, and he says something a bit genocide-y. He says, all the deer need to be wiped out, which again is kind of...
That guy hates deer.
I know.
He did not enjoy Bambi.
Yes.
Actually, maybe he did. Bambi.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't know. I mean,
maybe he was cheering in the theatre at that.
Well, he saw Bambi's mum dead, and he thought, that's a start. And they set up, for example, his dad lost to Jesse Owens in a race, and that sets up the thing that the film has going in it, which we're going to talk about a lot more in detail. But the for the sake of explaining the plot, there are these people who have this idea that black people are kind of superior, at least physically, and it's for that reason that they want to use the bodies of black people. And that is set up with this guy who loses a race to Jesse Owens. And
what does his dad say? He never got over
I think
it.
the weird thing is he says he almost got over it, which is slightly weirder.
He's like, I need to be a black person if I'm gonna run fast or whatever. That must be his granddad's thought.
Yes.
Like, what? Yeah. Which is obviously at the time you don't think about it, but yeah, it makes sense later.
Yes. And well, I think I possibly did notice some more. Well, actually, one thing I did notice that was a bit which made more sense on the second viewing is there's a scene at the dinner table where the brother of the family, I think he's called Jeremy, and I think they call him Jer Bear at one point, which is which I remember. But he's there's this conversation, and this is, you went into this, I know, you already knew the basic plot. I didn't know the plot really at all, apart from what I was able to kind of guess. And I actually have a whole kind of list in my notes of just wrong predictions, which I kind of like me trying to work out what's happening. There's a scene where Jer Bear is talking to the black guy, and I think the black guy says he does judo. Sorry, I've forgotten his name already. Chris is his name. Chris says,
Chris.
I do judo. And then Jeremy is like, I do jujitsu. And the first thing he says is, basically, jujitsu is about kind of wits and intelligence rather than strength. And you kind of get with that this idea of, and this has always been a bit of a sort of, well, a massive underpinning of racism is the idea of like black people are big and strong, but not as intelligent as white people, which is something that people have believed. But there's obviously kind of he wants to demonstrate his jujitsu by getting Chris in a headlock, and of course the first time I watched it I just thought, well, that's a bit weird, but then what you realise second time you're watching it is that is how he catches people. And there's almost this weird, and they don't do much with this, but there's this subtle thing going on throughout the film of the entire family seems to have this very sneaky approach to luring in victims, where they they pretend to be all nice and blah 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 blah, and clearly this guy Jeremy has this different approach where he just jumps them and knocks them out with a headlock. And it's very weird actually, because there's this kind of tension going on that you see a couple of times emerge, where it's like clearly the family has their issues with Jeremy's quote wrangling methods, and I was kind of surprised they didn't do anything of that. One of my wrong predictions going into it was I thought, well, the brother is so obviously racist that he's going to turn out to be a good guy, and of course that did not end up happening. But
that would be interesting.
Yeah, well, you know what? Actually, I do have a lot of things that I think, thought would have been quite interesting going into the film.
Well, can we mention, just to start off, the you mentioned the foreshadowing before.
Yes.
And there's a lot of hints at the beginning of the movie of what's going to happen.
Oh, I might have missed this.
A lot of things that are clever, particularly when I think Chris walks into the kitchen, and the father says, "We keep a little piece of my mother in here," and obviously it's
oh goodness,
his dad's mother, who obviously is in the body of that the black woman.
Yeah, wow.
So that right there is that it's just so clever.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of clever things in this.
Yeah, when Rose gets angry at the police officer, remember, because she's looking at or he's trying to look at Chris's ID.
Yeah.
And Chris is like, no, it's fine. And Rose is like, no, you don't have to give him it at all. It's because she doesn't want the officer to know who he is. So when he goes missing, the officer won't be like, oh yeah, I remember that guy.
Yes, I did notice that, although there was
Yeah.
one thing, and this is something that I need to talk about this. There were several things that the family did that don't make that much sense in terms of their plan. And one thing is, and this is, I do agree with the whole, she was trying to throw the cops off, but the weird thing about that is,
Yes.
it seems as if from the conversation, she was the one who called the policeman, which is a bit confusing. And I'll be willing to, say, well,
I'm not sure about that.
well, the thing is, what happened is, well, my memory of it is he said, oh, for future cool animal control, and he appears to be saying it to her. It could be that, well, the things we obviously don't see the call be made, but there was another thing that was a bit kind of, I mean, again, I liked this film, but I do think that this film had issues. Some of it associated with the fact it was a horror, which I've already gone through, things like the jump scare and people kind of not acting exactly how they should. But there was another thing that was a bit weird. It was a bit weird, in my opinion, that they had the black people be servants in the house. When you think, like, if they're trying to lure black people in, I would have thought, I mean, I've never tried kidnapping an innocent person, but if I was going to do it, I would probably not do anything that made it seem, like made anything about the house suspicious, especially if I knew that my grandparents apparently act like complete psychopaths as black people.
Well, that's the thing. When Chris goes over to talk to the granddad, who obviously he thinks is just a normal black person, like his granddad just talks like so weird, and like obviously like his granddad must know I'm not talking like a normal like African American or or however old. He's like 40 probably, the guy, or 30. The
guy he abducted.
The guy who's been abducted, and he's kind of like just talking like as he normally would, and he must realise that Chris is going to think, wow, this is really weird. And then again, the grandma, like who when she unplugs Chris's phone and apologises, she's really really weird. And there's like, you got to imagine that Chris, like, why would he become suspicious?
I know,
it's just talk normally. Don't try to make him like really weirded out.
I think it's one of the weird things is that, for example, the dad, one of the things that he does is he starts being like, oh, my man Chris, like trying to act black in a way that which is it's kind of funny that you've got this white guy who's acting more convincingly black than the black people. It is very weird. I mean, one of the things that I assumed...
They're supposedly experts at this. They've done this a numerous amount of times. Why doesn't his dad tell the granddad to just say "my man" when talking to Chris?
I know, yeah. It's weird because one of the things that I did notice is that the groundskeeper says "doggone" at one point, and it took me a while to kind of, because obviously that's not really a phrase we have in England, like "oh, doggone it," but that's obviously, I guess, something that older people in America say, and it's a bit of a weird. But I was like, yeah, that's not. It is confusing that every single person. But the weird thing is, it's not even like they act like white people. When you none of the white people talk like complete weirdos, but the white people in the bodies of black people act like complete weirdos. I'm not sure if like it's supposed to be like maybe there's some kind of side effect of the brain transplant, but if that's true, then you'd think like that would be something they'd notice, and it would kind of make them realise, like the guy who obviously was there was an art dealer in it, and he wanted to, and I thought this was actually quite clever. He wanted Chris's eyes because he was blind, but he was clearly a reasonably intelligent person, and you think like, is he just going to become, in a hypothetical, alternative scenario where he actually ended up living in Chris's body, would he have become, a complete weirdo? And you don't really know, but yes,
Yeah.
it does seem like I'd be like, hold a minute, why is it every single black person or white person I've met who's adopted this, black body, is a complete weirdo? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, to be honest, that is something that I guess you just have to have in this movie to make it
Yes.
seem suspicious. But I still think it would have been nice if maybe the grandparents had tried to act black, and then Chris would be like, wait, something's a
Yeah,
little
I
off.
think-
Instead of it staring you in the face, there is something clearly off with
Yes,
these people.
I think. I mean, I'll probably get back onto that a bit later, but I do think there's a lot of kind of missed opportunities in terms of they could have gone further. One of the things that I did actually get right going early into it was I actually took a note of when it was 40 minutes in. 40 minutes in was when I made basically a pretty accurate prediction. The way the groundskeeper, I think he's given a name,
Yeah.
but I can't remember his name. I instinctively want to call him Willie, groundskeeper Willie. But
Groundskeeper Will. That's settle on. That's a good name.
yes.
Groundskeeper Will.
Oh, you know what? Actually, just on the subject, sorry, one more thing on the weird thing. That running scene when he goes out at night.
Oh yeah. Why does he run straight at it?
And then, like, the weird thing is, like, you just think, like, you'd say, hello, you wouldn't, like, and then he's trying to pass it off as, like, oh, sorry, when I run, I don't, and it's just weird. But when he's having that conversation about, oh, yeah, I was running, sorry, it scared you, that he says, basically, oh, isn't Rose lovely? And at that point, I was thinking, oh, he's, Rose is luring these black men, or women apparently as well, into this cult thing. I made two basic wrong presumptions. My first one was that I assumed it was going to be supernatural, and obviously one of that was the fact that everyone was acting so weird. There's a scene where it's at the party, and I did like the party, but Chris, he goes upstairs, everyone's talking, and then they all go completely silent. Just at the second he walks upstairs, they go silent and they start looking up, like, at the ceiling. And I assumed, like, that was kind of like a supernatural thing. And this is where I tell you the completely unrelated scenario that or plot line that I invented for this film at that moment.
Okay. Go for it. Let's
So there's this idea in horror that horror films kind of reflect, and obviously the film does do this, but horror films reflect certain societal anxieties. Like the reason why the zombies always go to the mall in zombie films is because it's a commentary on consumerism and things like that. And on the subject of zombies, one of the first zombie films ever made was called White Zombie. And it was called White Zombie because historically zombies were not white. The idea of zombies actually comes from Haitian voodoo, and the belief is, and you can see it's not like the traditional zombies as we know them, but the idea was that when you died, there was this chance that a voodoo witch doctor would come along and he would resurrect you and you would become his slave. And obviously, for Haiti, that makes complete sense, because I don't know how much history you know, but, well, I guess you know a lot, but I don't know how much history you know about Haiti, but it is Haiti.
No, I don't know a lot about
yeah.
it. I'm gonna confess.
Haiti actually achieved its independence during something called the Haitian Revolution, where they fought the French, and it was a slave rebellion, basically, and they fought the French, and they kicked them out, and it's actually kind of a one of the few examples of like a really successful slave revolution.
That really successful.
They beat them, just kicked them out, and then they had their own country, and everything's been fine since then. Yeah, but obviously one of the anxieties that you would get from that culture is this anxiety about slavery and this kind of social fear about the worst possible thing would be being a slave to someone else. And then in that sense, that's where the idea of zombies came from. And then obviously George Romero culturally appropriated it and just made it brain eating. Well, George Romero didn't introduce brain eating, but like people eating and things like that. And but that's the thing. Like, I assumed, like, at this point or at one point when it started to get really supernatural, around the time when they did the whole like looking up, like, oh, it's I can't wait to eat him or whatever. I was thinking, oh, this is going to be kind of an homage to voodoo and kind of witch doctor practice. And I also thought this was going to be slave owners from the former Deep South who were trying to create this this slave society with voodoo. And it wasn't actually until the minute they explained what they were going to do that I realized what they were going to do. Because what happened is, obviously he sat in this chair tied up, and they show this thing, and it's called coagula, and this guy comes out and he says, we're going to create this perfect society. And even at that moment I was thinking, okay, he's going to say, we are white former Confederates and we're going to kidnap black people and turn them into our slaves using ancient mystic voodoo witch doctor magic, whatever. And then he says, oh, we're going to steal your brains and put white people inside them. And to me, that was actually a complete bona fide surprise. But and I like where they went with it, but also it left a lot of the more supernatural elements unexplained. Was my problem.
Well, what unexplained?
Well, the big thing, obviously the fact they were acting so weird.
Yeah, well, you could say that's just because the procedure isn't that great, but they just act kind of weird.
Also, well,
but then why wouldn't you hide them, like from Chris,
and
to stop him trying to escape or whatever?
And the way everyone acts, a bit weird. Like a lot of people just act very weird, and it is a bit confusing. I mean, it still, I wasn't like, oh, I hate it, but I did think, there's a few things in it which clearly seem. I mean,
I know.
One of the things that a lot of people do criticize horror films for is they kind of criticize things in horror films that seem to happen just for the camera. Like, you think a classic example, and they don't do this too much of this film, is like when someone's walking along and this person is kind of like stalking them, and then they keep disappearing, and you're like, why are they even doing that? And then they don't do anything, and you're like, oh, it was for the camera. But that doesn't happen too much in this film. But there are a few things in the film where you think, they wouldn't be doing this unless they were trying to set up this, like it's an organization that's like, hey, let's try and look like we're a bunch of scary people, just in case there's a camera watching.
Yes.
Which
they don't do a good job of hiding it.
Yes, and it's a bit, a bit. The other,
Well, to be honest, that does. I was just going to say that does play into the kind of thing about this being a commentary on horror movies.
Yes, and that's
about how basically this guy, he can see there's something clearly wrong, but he just stays there because the movie needs to happen.
Yes, and that is definitely something I want to get into. You know what? I have to bring this up because I wrote it down and it's not relevant at all, and there's no way I can bring it up organically. But it did.
Right,
okay.
Go for it.
So I thought I was being really, really clever, and then I found out 1 million people already made this joke. In in the scene where he's in the chair, and he's tied up, he has a pretty clever way of escaping. He puts these cotton earbuds in his ears, so he can't hear.
Oh, is it a joke about black people?
It is a joke.
Yes.
And I thought I was so clever. I was like, oh man, I'm hilarious. And I wrote it down. I just wrote, picking cotton prevents someone being a slave. But yes.
Very good. Yeah, that's great. I just wanted to, because obviously you went into this movie pretty blind. I just wanted to find out, when did you realise that Rose was in on it and wasn't just like the innocent girlfriend?
I suspected it at 40 minutes in, like I say, when the groundskeeper was like, oh, she's really lovely. You know what, actually, and I'm not sure if...
Well, can I just point out that I don't know what Rose's motivation to continue with this kind of thing is.
Yeah, actually,
Because she's obviously capable of being normal, but she still is in this cult,
Yeah.
and she doesn't seem to have anything to gain from it. I mean, at the at the end of the movie, it's shown like her with a laptop, and
Yeah.
drinking milk and eating Cheerios, not with the milk. I imagine like Jordan Peele may have been like, okay, how can we get this character to look weird? How about eating cereal and drinking milk and not putting them together?
It's because of that crunch.
That's it.
You've got to get that crunch.
If she was just eating cereal normally, like she wouldn't seem weird, but be separate. Now, she's weird.
Oh yeah,
now she's got
it's good.
motivation.
Or when she smiles while she's being strangled, and I didn't get. But
Yes.
no, one of the things
What is
about
her
that,
motivation?
on the subject of her motivation, is that I wasn't sure, and I was kind of expecting this to happen, and maybe kind of because I was expecting this, kind of imposing it or projecting it onto the film. She's sat there and she's kind of like looking for this picture of this guy, and she kind of clicks on this topless picture of him, and I wasn't sure if basically she just is really into black guys, like, and that's kind of like her motivation for it, is that she is,
She likes black
Yeah.
guys. Okay, but then there's the next
which
step
is
to actually-
murder. Like I mean,
or kind of murder.
well, I mean, you could almost, if you wanted to bring gender politics into it, you could make an argument that it kind of plays
yeah,
into,
let's do that.
the idea of a predatory sexuality, like a Black Widow in a way, if you'll pardon the expression.
Well, let's start talking about the whole sort of meta commentary on the movie. On the genre
Yes.
itself, the horror genre, and I think that is manifested through the Rob character, the friend of Chris.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. So I looked at him as kind of like the audience, like actually looking at the movie, just saying stuff that would pop into the audience's head, and like any rational person, like, what are you doing there? Get out! You shouldn't go.
Get out.
Like, at the end of the yeah, get out, exactly. At the end of the movie, like when Chris has just survived and killed, all the family, and Rose is left there for dead, and he gets in Rob's car. I think that's his character, Rob. I hope I'm not getting that wrong.
yeah. I think he is called Rob.
Because that would be embarrassing.
Nah,
I think
it's called
Um,
Rob. I think
but
it's
yeah.
called Rod actually.
Oh, is it Rod? Or whatever.
But now, no, I don't want
R.I.P.
to. I don't want to correct you though, because it's even worse if I try and correct you and I'm wrong.
It is Rod Williams.
Oh, genius.
I'm
Yeah,
looking at
okay.
it. Rod Williams. And so he just, like, there's all this drama that's just happened, like, and Chris just gets in and he just says to him, I told you shouldn't have gone in there. Like, really,
yeah.
like, undercutting, like, the whole kind of movie, and just saying something that obviously is unnatural. You'd say, are you okay? What happened? I told you shouldn't have gone in there.
He was a really good character, actually. I think one of the things about this film, actually, is all the characters who don't act absolutely insane have really well drawn characters. Like, Rod has a good character. He's funny. He's kind of, well, I guess you could make an argument he's maybe a bit of a stereotype, but I mean that's nothing strictly wrong with that. But
like he's a stereotype in certain ways, but
yeah,
he's believable.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of the characters actually were very well drawn in terms of you could understand their motivation. I actually thought even the Rose character was well drawn, and one of the things about it actually is that, and I'm kind of returning back to your question about when did I realise she was a weirdo or in on it,
Mm-hmm.
is that I basically didn't until, or I didn't say like, oh, she's definitely in on it, until the reveal itself, where she opens up the box and she looks at all these or he looks at all these pictures, sorry. And the thing about it is, I was going into it and I was thinking, because one of the things that I'm actually quite bad at doing, just to completely discredit myself as anyone worth talking about films with, is I'm actually quite bad, I think, at recognising bad acting. And of course, I've heard people say that the Rose character isn't a good actor, and of course, I guess that's it would make sense that she wasn't a good actor.
She wasn't great, I thought.
Yes.
But she wasn't like.
Yeah, I thought.
She
I
was
mean,
okay.
the thing about me is, I feel like I just think of all the people I've ever met who acted weird. Like, I think about, like, if I met, like, some people I've met in real life, if I saw them in a film, I'd be like, man, that guy's a terrible actor. But it's actually real people. So yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. I'm always willing to give kind of bad acting the benefit of, I mean, obviously there's limits, but
Oh, while we're on the subject of acting, can we talk about the main guy, Daniel
Kaluuya.
Yeah,
I feel like
Kaluuya.
Kaluuya is a type of alcohol, which is.
Okay.
But yeah, okay.
What did you think of the actor's performance?
I think it was.
Because I didn't think it was that great, to be honest. And the thing is, he was nominated for a Golden. Oh, it wasn't a Golden Globe. What was he nominated for? Best Motion Picture. Yeah. He received Best Actor for a Comedy or Musical, which is weird because it's not a musical or a comedy.
Well, you know what I mean.
And that nomination in, but whatever.
We
Okay.
can talk about the thing is they don't have a horror for Golden Globes, which is well, I think,
right.
but we could talk about kind of the way that Academy Awards and Golden Globes actually work, which is, and this has been pointed out by a lot of people, but a lot of the time it will be like every single nomination doubles as a best movie thing. So it's like, for example, I think it's very rare, for example, that you see someone win an award for good acting in a film that isn't good. For example, I mean, Obi-Wan Kenobi or Ewan McGregor is a really good actor in Revenge of the Sith. He does a really good job, but he's never going to get any sort of real kudos for that, because it's kind of like, oh, you can't say he was. And I think the point that Red Letter Media made in one of their Oscar reviews is that.
The first time we're bringing them.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Nice.
The sound design in Krampus.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Krampus sound
was
design
really good.
Was the best,
but it didn't
get an award for it
because it's not a good. Yeah, because it's not, and that's the thing. Like so it's kind of like they give him a good acting award because it's a good film. I think is possibly how it works. I mean, there was.
Can
nothing
I
about
just
him that was awful.
mention this about Daniel Kaluuya? Maybe why I didn't think he was that great was because
racist.
I know him from his previous roles, and he plays a guy in a. Have you heard of Harry Enfield?
Yeah.
So he had a sketch show a few years ago with his friend Paul something. I think it begins. It's like Paul Whitehouse or something, called Harry and Paul.
I feel like I
Ed on the BBC. Yeah. And
Parking Pataweo.
Parking Pataweo. This guy's fucking Parking Pataweo.
Holy, oh my god, I didn't recognise him.
And that's what I was thinking. He's like, oh my god, Parking Pataweo's got himself on the movie. Obviously, Parking Pataweo is I guess a black African, I don't know, version of Postman Pat, whatever. Like, and that was in the, and he's a traffic warden. And that was the sketch.
Did you know that going into it? Did you know? Okay,
yeah,
is that?
Yeah,
I feel like that's the reason you picked the film. You were lying about, oh yeah, it's really good, kind of race commentary, horror stuff. Really, it's just because you wanted to talk about Parking Pataweo.
I wanted to talk about those sketches are great. I think I showed you and Dylan last year.
By the way, I low-key decided that Dylan is going to be like so in certain things there's like this guy you constantly refer to but you never see, and I realised like I think there's a good chance that a lot of things go just Dylan, like, oh yeah, because Dylan submitted the graphics and the theme tune for this podcast. He said, Dylan, do this, and he gave us this awful thing. We didn't use it, but it was so funny.
But Dylan's a part of the podcast, but he's never actually going to be part of the podcast. You get what I mean?
Yeah, he's like the passenger. But so I assume then that Parking Pataweo, as he'll henceforth be known, is British then, I guess.
Yes, he is
Okay.
British. Do you remember actually after Get Out came out and there was all this hype around it, obviously because it was such a great movie? Samuel L. Jackson came out, and I remember this, and he said that British actors should not be portraying American actors, or specifically British
African,
I guess
British
black,
African American.
Yeah, yeah, black British actors should not be portraying black American actors because there's a lot of fine black American actors. out there.
You know what?
Which is
I was
interesting.
well, one of the things that's interesting in a way is that in the UK, and this is something I am going to bring up later on because I think it's relevant to us, is in the UK there aren't as many black people as a percentage of the population as there are in the United States, and it's kind of funny because John Boyega, who is obviously a famous black actor
another
recently,
one, John Boyega,
and
yes.
well, this guy, and I guess Idris Elba. Are all kind of like famous.
Does he play an African American? Because I've seen Idris Elba in a lot of Hollywood movies, and he has a British accent.
I think he plays a African American in what's that film, The Wire? I think he was in The Wire, but now I'm doubting myself. But
well, the thing is, I saw The Dark Tower, and he was in it, and I'm pretty sure he had a British accent.
You know what? Sometimes I don't even notice whether people have a British accent.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to think back. I'm pretty sure he has a British accent.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, it is kind of like, I don't know. I mean, I just find it weird. I don't know if I'd make a crusade about it or pick it as a hill to die on. But it is a bit weird considering we don't have that many. But I think part of it, and actually, you know what? I'm going to bring this up later, but I have to bring it up now because it is very relevant. Is that in the UK in general, I think I'm trying to think of how I can word this. The black people we have here, I was alternatively going to say are black people. British black people. Yes, British black people tend to be, and again, this is something I am going to bring up with regards to a broader conversation about race. But British black people tend to be, in my experience, better off than American black people, and I think there's an obvious reason why that would be true. American black people were slaves, but I think, for example, that probably means that a lot of black people in Britain are going to have kind of the opportunities to reach, become actors and stuff, which is again something I want to talk about, kind of how the situation for black people is different in the UK compared to America, because we are British.
Well, yeah, I mean, America is dominated by race. The societal sort of hierarchy, I guess, it's all about race. Well, here it's about class.
I so need to talk about. I could have an entire conversation just. So recently, and here's a bit of context. I've been listening to fascist podcasts, and the reason I've been doing it is because.
Okay, you're gonna have to add context.
Yes, I've been. I've been taking an increasingly active interest in kind of the rise of modern fascism, and there's actually like a billion tangents I could go off on here, but so I've been listening. It's called it's called The Daily Shower, so very wholesome people. But one of the things that fascists talk about a lot nowadays is this thing called the Society of Trust, and what they mean by that is it's their way of saying pretty much, we would have a utopia if we didn't have multiculturalism. And their argument is, white people and black people and Asian people and, Hispanic people, we all trust each other, and we wouldn't be, And the thing is, I think that argument, and the thing is, what they use that argument for is they use it to convince, because I actually know a lot of kind of people who were libertarians in 2012, 2013 are now white nationalist fascists. Like, the rise of the alt-right has brought in a lot of libertarians, and one of the ways it's done that, and one of the big kind of fascist talking points, or alt-right talking points, is they say, we need freedom, and we're all about freedom, but we're only going to be able to have freedom when we can trust people with that freedom, and we can't trust black people with freedom, is basically their argument. And of course, all the people saying this are American. As we know, the only people in the world who are libertarians are Americans. But one of the things about this, of course, to me, as kind of a white middle-class person, that makes no sense, because a lot of the black people I know, because I have grown up in a place where there are black people, And lots of the black people I know, of course, have principally children of first-generation immigrants who have moved to this country because they had kind of unique skills. So, for example, there's one black family in my street. My street is relatively small, so I think we've got quite a representative street, but there's one black family in our street, and they came here from, I think, Malawi, because the dad went to, the University of Lilongwe, and he got a doctorate in, neuroscience or something. So, and then the UK said, hey, you're a skilled person, come to this country. And that is, a decent amount of my experience as a kind of white British person with black people has been that they are principally very well educated, usually very kind of a lot of time more traditional, and like everything that kind of the white racists say in America about black people, for me, is just like not true at all. For example, when I
are you saying white racists in America are ignorant?
No.
Are you actually making
I know.
this claim? Well, yes, I know. It's easily
yes, and that's the thing. And then I think like who would I rather? Who do I trust more? The family of black middle class. One of them's a doctor, or the white kind of crackheads, whatever. And I don't want to like
okay, then maybe not.
Yeah, I'm not trying to judge, but the reality is, if I did judge people, I would judge people indiscriminately. I just want that on record.
No, that's great.
But like that's the thing. Like to me, this kind of idea of racism is so dumb, and it doesn't make any sense in the UK because we're so divided by class.
Is that better than America, when you can have like a white working class guy and a rich white billionaire who have more in common than somebody who's black of their own
Well, I think
class?
the thing is, it is kind of, because it's kind of like, I mean, obviously, we can talk about this. Black people are, in the US, overrepresented in crime statistics and underrepresented in various sort of educational things. And there's a very obvious reason for that. It's because black people tend to be poorer in the United States. They tend to come from poorer areas, and the difference racists like to claim is biological and inherent pretty much disappears entirely once you account for poverty. People who have objectively had a worse life have objectively, that by definition they are poorer. By definition they come from, less privilege. And of course those people are going to have had, or are going to reflect that in some aspects of how they behave. So at least class-based privilege, you can actually look at it properly and realise poverty is the problem.
Okay.
Kind of going back to race, but still on the subject of the film, on the subject of my wrong predictions, before I went into this film at all, I assumed it would have something to do with police shootings and things like, the Trayvon Martin case, the Michael Brown case. And the funny thing is, I actually, I'm not going to talk about this because we've already said enough stuff that's kind of tangential, but I actually brushed up preemptively on kind of the Trayvon Martin case and why it was, horrible, because I thought that this was going to be like kind of a story about this, black guy. He moves to this suburb, and there's this guy who's suspicious of him, and this suspicious guy kind of, follows him around because he thinks he's a criminal. And that's what I thought it was going to be, and I was completely wrong on that. But that's kind of like, it's kind of a testament to kind of how much there is that this film could have been. And actually, I think what this film did instead was so much more clever. And one of the things I look for, which makes me say a film is good, is I say a film's bad if there's like things in it where I think, well, I wouldn't have done that. That was stupid. And I say a film is good if there's things in that I think, well, I wouldn't have done that. That's really clever, and that's kind of like my basic metric. Let's see. I'm just gonna blast through everything I've written down. I think I said, okay, I know quite a bit of what I want to talk about. First of all, I basically just wrote down that there was a title drop where the guy said "Get Out" when he. Actually, you know what? I do want to talk. The camera flash thing was really clever, I think, and it was kind of great how they introduced it, and it kind of was a good tension raiser, where it was like.
It was introduced very.
And then
as well.
And then later on it's reincorporated again. And then I've got to talk about kind of the escape, because the escape I really liked, and then I was kind of ambivalent on, because one of the things I think you want to see in horror films is the good guy completely just, messing up all of the bad guys. And I really liked kind of, he does his trick, he bashes the guy's head in.
Oh yeah, why does that guy not?
I know, you can
he's
see
got
blood
head pouring from.
Yeah.
Sorry, blood pouring from his head, and somehow he can get up and function well
Yeah.
and try to strike.
Well,
like that. I mean, you should just not have shown the blood if you wanted him to come
well, the
back.
thing is, actually, the first thing I thought when I watched it for the first time was, parking Pat away. Chris is an idiot for a.
No, Colin
I
Farrell.
know. Chris is an idiot because he should have made sure that guy was dead. Was the first thing I thought when I watched it. But then the second time I watched it, I was watching to make sure, okay, make sure he's dead. And then I saw the blood, and I was like, well, I think I would have assumed he was,
Yeah, I would have assumed if he's got blood literally pouring from his head, it was like he's dead, or at the very least, unconscious.
Oh, actually, there's one thing
for a long period of
I
time.
want to talk about. Is same thing, not moving away from it. But I loved the fact, because my fear was when he got captured and he was tied up, that the rest of the film was just going to be the TSA guy finding everything out and rescuing him. And I was worried he was going to be a completely passive protagonist who just, gets rescued at the last minute. And I was really happy that he became an active protagonist, doing things, because, well, I've seen people say, he's a bit whipped throughout the whole film, which, I'm okay with that assessment, and I think, they're like, oh, it's kind of empowering that he, actually takes things into his own hands, and I can kind of get behind that. It's not quite a Django Unchained, but, it's nice to see a bunch of...
It's not quite a Django Unchained. No.
But, I love kind of just the constant scenes of, people getting completely wasted, but, there are a few moments where I think, well, first of all, I didn't like the fact that, I didn't like, and I'll let it off. I didn't like it, but I'll let it off. The scene where the guy, the doctor, the dad, he walks out, he looks one way, no one's there, he looks the other way for a second, turns around, gets antlered in the face, and you think, how on earth did Chris negotiate that? How did he know not to? It's kind of it doesn't make any sense. But you let it off.
That's what we mentioned right at the beginning with the guy who just suddenly sneaks up and something. Yeah.
Yes, it does. It doesn't make any sense, but you let it off. But the one thing that I will not let it off for is that, well, first of all, the second he found out that Rose was tricking him, I thought immediately, all right, she's on the floor looking for her keys, fucking stamp on her face, crush it, and do it, because the thing is, alright, maybe you'll get hurt, but at that point there can't be any doubt in your mind that, given everything that's happened, you're in trouble, you're screwed if you go with this. And I don't understand why he lets her look for her keys, and then he says, let's do this on the move, and it's you think he surely knows what's going to happen. What does he think she's going to do? Anything that he could be doing, she must be, any number of steps ahead of him.
Okay, well, that's the thing.
It's so the plot could happen.
They have to have
I think, I wish, in my head canon, he punched her in the face, one knockout punch, took her keys, jumped out the window, because they're very athletic with their genetics, and got in the car, drove off. That's what just, I guess you kind of, when you're watching things like this, you think, what would I have done? But
Oh, can I just point out, Mike, the way he found out that Rose was cheating?
Was kind of dumb.
That was really poorly done. I think it could have been the movie is smart in so many ways, and that's why I really like it. It's really clever, it's compelling, but I mean, come on, the door's open and there's a box which tells him all he needs to know. I mean, come on, he could have done something.
And you know what? I actually think, obviously, she left the door open, and then obviously the thing is, he should have known that she knew he knew, because she was there. She saw him in that cupboard, and but the thing is, I wish, they really should have just not had that moment, because, he didn't need to find out before. It just made it more confusing.
Yeah, not really necessary, is it?
So he gets caught. He does this whole thing, running away, escaping. Number one, he really should have stabbed that black woman, or the I don't even know her name.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
he should, when he saw her in the kitchen, he should have just been like, "Oh, you're obviously a bad person who's done
Yeah.
exact."
She's an accomplice to his
Yes,
murder.
and he should have picked up a knife from the kitchen, stabbed her, walked into the other room, knocked over the teacup, stabbed her with that knife. Like it falls into the stupid kind of horror thing of people putting down weapons, which doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of people are very quiet, and it's like the guy who jumps him, Jeremy. Obviously, he shouldn't have been able to jump him in the first place because he should have been dead. But the fact that he was able to run up silently and then suddenly just appear on him with strength doesn't really make sense. But
Why do these characters in horror movies, Michael, make these just
yes,
illogical decisions? I bet if Rod was there with Chris, he'd be like, "Hey, why are you dropping that knife?"
yes, exactly.
Like just alongside.
You know what,
Hey, why
actually,
you pick that
I
knife?
just
That would be nice if he was with him and like just making sure he was realizing all the mistakes typical
yes.
characters in horror movies.
I was going to say
that would be good. I would enjoy.
what I
that.
would love to see. I mean, this is completely unrelated, but I would love to see a horror film where like someone's being watched and they're making and like they the person who's watching them is invested in them surviving, and they're like making all these mistakes, and there's a person just watching like, what are you doing? But no, and then obviously, and this is what I want to kind of close on really, before we get into the race stuff, is he's driving along, he's about to leave, she jumps in front of the car, and he gets out to rescue her. And it doesn't. I don't care. I know it's like kind of clever with the whole. Oh well, he abandoned his mum, so he's not going to abandon her. But it just makes it's a completely illogical action, and it is it's dumb. And I kind of wish he would have just. I think it would have been.
If Rod was there, he'd say like, "No, we just drive."
What I would love to see is a reversal. So it's kind of like and I think this would have been brilliant. He hits her with his car. She's lying behind him. He has flashbacks to his mother. He has the whole thing, and then he just reverses the car and runs her over. I think that would have been brilliant. And I just think it's kind of
that would have been
you
good.
want to see.
That would have been good.
It's okay having a stupid character to set up kind of everything going wrong, but I think once things are going wrong and the character's escaping, you want to see him killing everyone. Now we end on the fight of basically the final point, which is he gets chased. He uses the flash to get the granddad to realize he's not the granddad basically, and then the granddad shoots the girl, then he shoots himself, and then Chris is strangling Rose, and you think the police have shown up. Now it turns out it's not the police, it's the TSA agent. But what it does there,
Yes.
and this is very clever, is it makes you think, oh wow, race is an issue. My cat is scratching on my door. Race is an issue, and if it was a cop, he probably would have been screwed. He probably would have gone to jail. And it kind of reminds me of at the end of Night of the Living Dead. There's this huge zombie outbreak. The protagonist is black in Night of the Living Dead. It's one of the reasons why it's considered a very progressive film. The protagonist is black, and at the end of the film, he thinks everything's fine, and then he just gets shot by the police because they see him and they go, "Oh, this is a zombie," and he just dies, and that's how the film ends. I was kind of surprised this film had a happy ending. I was really expecting this film to end with him in prison at that exact moment, but I was really happy it was happy.
Yeah, Jordan Peele has said he is open to producing a sequel. So maybe that is why he didn't end up dead, because he wanted to maybe go forward with this. Because I think there's an obvious sequel here, which is that he breaks up the whole cult, because obviously there's like 50 white people who are in on it, and he somehow, I don't know how, but manages to, save all the black people who have been changed over the course of however many years, and all of that stuff, and just break up the whole organization. That I think could be a good, maybe use different
Yes,
characters.
I want to talk. Well, I think a sequel is relevant because we're going to. So obviously, I've just brought up race issues. Now we've got to turn into race. I want to start on just one point with race, which I think. Okay, well actually, let's start here. The point is, whatever we've said about the film and the plot and the horror elements doesn't necessarily matter, because this isn't a film. It is a satire of kind of white liberal racism. It's not.
Yes, that is
not kind of, and I think a lot of people, or what I thought going into it, was it's going to be a horror film with racial themes, and it isn't really that. It is fundamentally just a straight up satire of this white liberal mentality of overcompensating for race and starting to turn into black people are actually better than white people and all that stuff.
Yes. Well, I can imagine Jordan Peele, because I assume he lives in Los Angeles, and is involved with a lot of white Hollywood executive types, producing his show and many other. He will have seen this, obviously. He's a comedian, so obviously he thinks, how can I put this into a sort of into a movie, and this is what he's come up with, which is really a really clever way of showing that white people in America at least, they do tend to overcompensate. I mean, that stuff about Obama,
yes,
and bringing up Tiger Woods,
yes,
it's like, I'm imagining Jordan Peele like when he's having a conversation with an old white guy, like, Obama's brought up and Tiger Woods is brought up and maybe Oprah Winfrey's brought up. I don't know, but I think that's clearly his experiences of dealing with white people who don't want to offend.
Yeah, I mean, one of the good kind of hot takes I heard about it was someone said, if Get Out existed in the universe of this movie, then the dad would have talked about how much he loved to Get Out, which I thought was quite funny.
That's good, yes. Oh, I love that Get Out movie.
Yes, but you know what?
Yeah.
And one of the things I want to talk about is I think a lot of people misunderstand this film. First of all, like, one of the things I heard people say, because I like, I'm like this, I decided to watch basically a racist review of Get Out. Like a review pretty much made by a racist, and the funny thing was he said it wasn't a racial issue, and yet somehow he still felt the need to tell me in the first minute of the review that Jordan Peele is married to a Jew. He was like, this isn't a race. No, I'm not saying that I dislike it because it's racial. I'm saying that I dislike it because it's a bad film. However, Jordan Peele's married to a Jew. Let's not forget. And it's like, okay, but one of the things.
I mean, it's rated. Critics love it, obviously. So I mean, if you don't like this movie,
you're wrong.
Then either you just don't get it, or you're.
I mean, I don't want to imply like every person who dislikes this film is racist, but the thing is, what I've noticed actually is.
No, I said if you don't get it. So
you say things like something I've noticed recently is, and it happened actually. I'm going to bring up another reviewer. Do you know Jenny Nicholson? She kind of does like these Star Wars. I've heard the name. She made a review of The Last Jedi, and I know you have opinions on The Last Jedi, but basically one of the things she brings up is that she says some people don't like the Rose and Finn bits because they're racist, and someone in the comments said like, so you're saying the only reason you could dislike the Rose and Finn scenes is because you're racist, and it's like, no, she didn't say that. She said, and I want to, of course, there are actually people out there, and I hate to break it to you, there are people out there who inherently dislike the new Star Wars films because they have put up or promoted a lot of minority actors.
Yeah, a lot of diversity. Apart from the main character.
Yes, I know, it is dumb.
Whatever.
Like, it's not, like, I think it's an incomplete effort, But the thing is, like, there are people out there, and if your response to hearing that is saying, so you're calling me racist, then you're probably racist. Because I didn't say that everyone who dislikes the film is racist. I said there are people out there who dislike the film because they're racist. But like, the thing is, one of the things I've heard from people about this film is they've said, like, they said it's supposed to be a comedy, but there aren't any jokes, and I think it is satirical.
Yes.
And the point is, so I can understand people saying it's a horror comedy in the sense of, there is this kind of dark comedy in terms of what it says about society. It's kind of like, and I'm going to have to make this comparison. Do you know the film or book as well, called The Stepford Wives?
I've heard of it.
It is about this woman. It's very similar, and that's why people have made comparisons. This woman goes to a suburban place, and she finds out that all the women there seem like perfect, and it turns out basically that they're like robots or clones or hypnotized into being perfect women. And it was written in the 70s, I think, during kind of the height of second wave feminism, and it's sort of, it is the companion piece to this film. And there were two things in this film that reminded me directly of feminist issues. Particularly two books that I've read. One called Reclaiming the F Word by two people called Orne and Redfern, and another one by someone called Susan Douglas called Enlightened Sexism. Now, both the books are basically about post-feminism and this idea of, like, feminism is over. And obviously this film is kind of dealing with post-racism and this idea that racism is over. And one of the main points that both books brought up, actually, is that in the kind of what's called the post-feminist 90s, during this girl culture movement, there was this idea that boys are inferior. And it was kind of like, oh, girls rule, boys rule, boys are stinky, blah, 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 blah. And the thing is, that idea is fundamentally anti-feminist. Because what it does is it takes, serious issues, like, for example, there is a sociological reason why rape happens. There is a, sociological reason why the wage gap exists. There are all these kind of complicated things. But they reduce it in this kind of girl power, post-feminist era to, well, boys are just stinky, boys are just smelly, boys are just dumb. And one of the things that you saw in that kind of cultural movement, and a lot of films came out that were like this, was the women were always strong and empowered, and the men were always stupid and dumb and didn't know what they were doing. And it sounds like, oh yeah, that's really progressive and feminist, but it isn't, because it's taking this kind of sociological issue and reducing it to personal flaws. And I think that connects directly into this kind of idea of, well, black people are better than white people. Because it's like, the issues like police shooting, like black people going to prison, like, differences in education facilities, all that stuff, is just reduced down to, well, white people sure do suck.
Yes. Oh, it's just the dumb white people.
Yes, exactly. And it's like, and it's not that. It's a societal issue, and
it's a real serious thing that needs to be tackled.
Yes, and the other thing is, on the subject, people misunderstanding it. First of all, there's the element of people saying, "Oh, it's not," they didn't find it funny, and like I can understand not finding it funny, but you also have to understand it is not completely serious, and that is why, and I think that excuses a lot of the more stupid things that happen. Like, for example, the way that everyone at the party says kind of overtly racist things. Or not necessarily, weird race things, like, oh yeah, you're so much stronger and stuff like that. It seems it stretches your, kind of credulity, but you can see how, well, if you take it as kind of it's a satire, you can see where that's coming from. But
it's like like a sketch in a comedy show, like this black person coming and and like everyone's acting really weird around him, and that's the joke. But obviously,
it's more than that.
It's not really like laughing out loud kind of thing. So that's why
I would say don't watch this if you want to laugh, but if you want kind of something more kind of George Carlin-y or Bill Hicksy, where it's like it's funny because it's true, and it's not really funny. But the other thing is, in terms of people misunderstanding it, is people saying, this is just a film that says racism is bad. Like, I've seen people kind of say, like, it's just a film that says racism is bad, and it's like, that's not really what it's saying. In fact, one of the things that I think is great about this film is that the thing this film is criticizing is stuff that is relevant to the audience of this film. Because the thing is, if you made a film that said racism is bad, it would be kind of virtue signaling. It would be saying, this thing that pretty much everyone agrees with.
By the way, I
know you hate it. The thing is, you're saying something everyone agrees with, except for the people who are already going to reject the film out of hand. If you just say racism is bad, but it'll be like a bunch of white liberals going, yeah, racism is bad, and a bunch of racists not watching the film. But what they've done is
the white liberal who shouts like, "Yay, racism is bad," and then says to their black friend, "Hey, I love Tiger Woods,
exactly.
He's great."
This film directly targets the people who will clap, "Oh yeah, racism's really bad," and I think that is really, really clever and important. But
yes.
Well,
can I just before we go on with this, there's something interesting about this. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about this movie, about how it talks about race, and obviously you brought up these points in this podcast. But I watched an interview with Jordan Peele. He was on the Stephen Colbert show, and he was basically talking about Get Out, and and he said he was in a lecture in a university, and it was on African American studies, basically, or African American film maybe, and the lecturer was talking about the movie Get Out, and he was sat in the back, and obviously he revealed himself to all the students in the lecture hall, and they were all very happy to meet him, and then he went up to the front and asked questions, and these students were asking him a load of questions about Get Out and its social commentary and race relations and all that, and he said on the Colbert show, he was just like, yeah, that's what I meant to do, like obviously just faking it. So which was interesting, so he was kind of implying that he didn't really, making this movie, he didn't really maybe know that much, that he was making all these points about race, that he was just, going along with it. So, yeah.
I think
like maybe he's just being modest.
Well,
but
there's that, but also there's maybe the idea of, for example, and I do say this because I think it's kind of important. A lot of the time, and this is actually kind of a controversial thing to say in the kind of context of this film, but I think a lot of the time, outsiders who study issues can understand those issues better. And the example I always use of that is linguistics. Like, for example, a French person who has studied English linguistics will probably know more about the English language than an English person who just speaks English. I'm going to mention Kyle.
Yes.
Kyle spoke some German and obsessed over the fact he was German. And he had some German ancestry, and he spoke some German. And I remember we were talking about Romanian, and he said, Romanian is a Germanic language. And I said, no, it's not. It's a Romance language. To which he said, I speak German. And it's like, okay, number one, you don't speak German, you speak some German. And number two, speaking German doesn't make you capable of, correctly identifying the kind of taxonomy of where different languages come from. And it's like, to me, one of the things that I think is possibly the same way, for example, I use all these complicated tenses and, linguistic quirks as someone who speaks English, but I don't know I'm doing them. I just, talk how I talk. And yet someone who is, French, who has come in and learned the language, will be able to pick up on all those things. And what... Yeah,
so you're saying
I'm kind of thinking Jordan Peele
is he's just the natural speaker who's just speaking, and these film, I guess, analysts come in and say, oh, you meant this and this, and he's
well,
like,
yeah, I think also
whatever,
he's black is the other thing. So he made this film knowing what it's like to be black, but just kind of having that as
it's like a personal experience.
Whereas for me, for example, I evaluate it because I think, well, I'm not black, so for me this is something I have to understand, I have to learn. Whereas for Jordan Peele and other black people, it's something they have to deal with, basically. So it's a different kind of situation. I think that is really important, and I think I will use it as an excuse to go into the issue of race blindness, because I know I don't need to tell you that it's stupid when someone says I don't see colour.
Oh yeah, that is just so stupid.
And
Just unbelievable.
people, there is,
Ignorant.
generally speaking, this film does not deal with, I don't see colour. But there are two moments in particular which I think kind of touch on that issue. The first one is they're just about to leave for the house, and Chris says to Rose, "Do your parents know I'm black?" And she responds to that question by saying, "No, why would they need to know that?" basically. And it's kind of like she's acting as if race isn't an issue, as if race isn't a thing.
Yes.
And I think that kind of mentality that people have of like, they think it makes them look less racist the more ignorant they act towards race. So it's like,
yeah. It's like, oh
yeah,
yeah,
like, oh, I never noticed you were black. And it's like,
oh yeah, you are. Now you mention it, I can
yeah,
see your skin is
like
darker
obviously,
than mine.
for example, like from my perspective, I would think, if I had a family member who had a black boyfriend, obviously I want to say wouldn't matter, I wouldn't care. But I would also completely understand a black person, given that they live in a world where race exists, racism against black people does exist. It's completely reasonable for them to say, do they know I'm black? And she basically says like, why would they need to know that? And that kind of, for me, touches into like,
yeah, he's kind of patronising.
yeah,
She's
like
kind of patronising
the race blindness. And the other element is, I noticed this, the Japanese guy, which is, you never get much of a kind of exploration of the Japanese guy, but he says, would you say that being African American is more advantageous or disadvantageous? And the dad says, and I think it's interesting that the dad says this, because the dad is one of the most active ones in kind of doing the whole I'm not racist thing. He says, ooh, that's a tough one. And you think, like, anyone who actually knew about kind of racial issues or cared about racial issues, or about, like, bell hooks or anyone, they'd be like, they wouldn't go, ooh, that's a tough one. What do you think, black person? Is it better to be a black person in modern society? And I think, like, that is the other example I saw of racial kind of blindness. And again, I don't want to talk. I know there's going to be a lot of people, because I've seen people who still think like, surely if you're saying, I saw something the other day on it was on Ancapistan, which is a great example of why anarcho-capitalism doesn't work, because it's just been taken over by fascists. Someone was saying, well, it was kind of, they were having a discussion about, I don't see colour, and someone said this, and I see it all the time. It says, if you see colour, you're racist. If you don't see colour, you're racist. And I always ask the people the same question: when has any black person ever told you that seeing colour makes you a racist? The thing is, they don't seem to understand that there's a difference between seeing colour and being a racist. And also, the thing is, I would add this point: saying you don't see colour doesn't make you a racist. It just makes you kind of ignorant and not an ally of racial minorities. But I think
it's kind of like you're on the sidelines, like when there's this battle going on between, I guess races. Certainly in America there is, and you're just like on the sideline, like, oh, I don't, who's battling you? I don't know what's happening out there on like the field or whatever. Okay. Like that's kind of the way I look at it.
I think I've officially worked out everything I want to say. I've worked it down to 3 major points that I've got left, and I think the first thing I want to talk about kind of the way that this film is about old people, because I found that a bit kind of weird, and I want to.
Okay, go on.
So I have had experience in my life with old people being racist in a kind of harmless way, quote harmless. For example, my grandmother recently said the phrase, "You know what?" in the woodpile. Now,
you mean the end?
You know that word, or that phrase, because recently a politician got in trouble for saying it, and I was kind of talking to her about it and saying like, oh well, you do see that it's kind of like an issue, don't you? And she said, well, when I think of that word, I don't
Yeah.
I don't think of a black person. I think of more like kind of a little mischievous imp. And I said, that you can't do that. And it's like, but the thing is, and the weird thing about it is, you know, it's such a kind of like bad thing to say, and yet it's like comes from just this position of ignorance, and it's kind of an interesting kind of topic for me. But one of the other things that like
she's not woke, Michael.
Well, one of the
She's
things she
not
also
woke.
does is she said, I think at least at one point she said like, oh yeah, Asian men are very attractive. So she's kind of done the whole like you know, oh, I'm not racist because blah 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 blah. But one of the things that I wish this film would have done, because I think that old people are too easy of a target. That is, you know, they're
known to be sort of, I guess,
Yeah.
poor when it comes to
I think
racial
like one of the
relations.
things is like a lot of old people, you know, they were raised in a society where black people, you know, couldn't drink out of the same water fountains as other people, and then like everyone laughs at them for saying coloured instead of, you know, person of colour. And it's like, I get it, and I get like, but I also think like it's a very easy target. And what I wish, and I'm not trying to be like, oh, think of the white people, but what I wish this film would have been about is millennials. I wish this film would have been, rather than going to, you know, an old suburb where there's all these old people, I wish it would have been, you know, they went to kind of like a liberal or communist commune or whatever, and everyone there was a vegan, and everyone there was like, oh yeah, I'm a Buddhist because I just think it's more spiritual, and like I find that
everybody voted for Bernie
Eastern
Sanders.
philosophy is so, and like, and I wish I would have loved to have seen like just and my official stance is I wish they would have taken the satire to the extreme, and I want to see like someone be like this woman kind of cut off this black man's skull and be like, I just want to understand the black plight, you know, like, because I think that would have been, to me, I think that would have been
That would have been going.
yeah,
too
and
far.
it always reminds me of
That would have made it just about satire and not really about the
yes
horror.
in Ralph Bakshi's Fritz the Cat, which I know you're a massive fan of. There's a scene in it where there's
No.
these women,
Oh my God.
and they're talking to basically these kind of black power activists, and they're like, oh yeah, you know, I really love the black people, and I think like, oh, the black people, they have such a vibrant culture, blah 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 blah, and black people are so exploited against. And then she says, my, you know, African studies professor says that the only people who can really understand the plight of the blacks are the Jews. I'm Jewish, by the way. And it's like, I love this idea that there's a certain narcissism to modern white progressive culture, where it's like, you have to make everything about you. So it's like, it can't just be like, oh,
Yes.
black people have this horrible situation going on, that's really bad. It has to be, oh, black people have this horrible situation going on, so I'm going to get dreadlocks, and I'm going to, you know, listen to rap. And I'm not...
I understand your pain. I'm
Yes,
special.
it's like, yeah, it's like just wanting to... And I have to, and I want to talk about this. I think that there is an idea out there that it is progressive and woke to date
Yes,
a
woke.
black person, or like, so there, I'm sure, and I'm not saying like, I'm not going to walk up to an individual in a, you know, multiracial relationship and be like, you're a poser, but I'm sure there are some people out there who are like, oh yeah, this makes me so kind of, and I mean, you do see it, like, people avoid accusations of racism by saying, well, you know, my partner's black, but
Yeah.
and I'm going to go back to Susan Douglas's Enlightened Sexism again, because she wrote a really interesting point. I'm not going to quote it directly, but she was talking about how there are actual white women out there who fetishize black men because they think black men are kind of, you know, they're manly and they're dangerous and they're, you know, really strong. And she says, like,
Yes.
the problem with that is you're going into it for fun. You're going into it because it's like this cute, dangerous thing that makes, you know, your southern redneck dad angry.
An adventure.
For black men, it means being shot by the police. For black women, it means potentially being beaten up and raped. You know, there's...
Yes.
It's not... And I think I'm going to close on something that isn't to do with racism quite, because I want to talk about how this film can be interpreted in a sort of non-racist way. And I know that I don't want to, be too, like de-racify it, like as if that's the ideal thing to do. But I think there's an element of this film that deals with kind of the idea of a consumerist identity, where it's like, your identity is something you buy, or your identity is something you just kind of casually sort of wear like an accessory. And it happens even with, for example, Christianity. Like, I know I've met people who have converted to Christianity, and I've said, but do you actually believe in God? And they've gone, well, I don't really think it's about that. I think it's more about the spiritual side of it. And obviously there's things like, the classic example is converting to Buddhism, but then there's, of course, for example, the people who do yoga, and they think that they're being, like, oh, I'm going to unlock my chakras. And it's like this idea of these things that have a real meaning to people become just this way, like a handbag, just a way for you to accessorize your own character. And I think that kind of thing, there is a lot of it that's to do with race, but I think it also goes beyond race. And I think that's kind of a...
Yeah, well, I just want to say, yes, I completely agree with your sentiments, but I think should we...
Yes, I was just about to...
Like,
I think I'm pretty much... I'll say... I'm not sure what order I think I'm going to do it in this order. One of the things that I do want to talk about is that films like this that are very satirical of kind of white progressive culture ought to make us realise that we are white progressives. And one question I did want to ask Luke is, did this film make you reflect on or kind of rethink any aspect of how you kind of deal with these issues?
No, because I was aware of these issues before, like the overcompensating, when talking to... The thing is, like, I've grown up, like, talking and conversing with black people just as, normal people. Like, well, obviously they're not normal. That's a real thing to say. But just like any other person. Obviously, you don't, they are black. But the thing is, I played basketball a lot when I was young, and obviously, as you can imagine, there was a lot of black people who also played basketball. And I just went to training with them. I just played with them, and it didn't matter what they were, but I still understand the fact that you can overcompensate, but I haven't done that throughout my life. Maybe because I was just used to like being with them being with them. That sounds bad. Being with people who are different from me.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Luke? I think you're a racist because if you were truly non-racist, you wouldn't have noticed that it was mostly black people playing basketball, because you wouldn't have seen colour.
No, well, no.
I'm kidding. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Anyway.
No, I don't think it wasn't mostly black, but there was a significant proportion.
I just wanted to make a joke like, I'd never noticed that it was black people playing basketball because I'm not a racist.
Yeah. Yes.
But
yes.
yeah, I think for me, I think I have identical situation. I could talk. We're not going to talk about it. I think there is more that could be said about racism in the UK and our situation with black people and stuff like that. I think we've already covered most of it with kind of the class thing. Like, and I pretty much said what I had to say on that. For me, the difference between me and a black person who's middle class is nothing compared to the difference between me and a white person who's working class. And yeah, for me it is very much kind of... I mean, I'm sure I do have some slight... I think I have very few... I think I'm very good on the race issue. Just to, kudos to myself. Yeah, thank you.
Well done.
No, I think...
No, that's the thing. Like, we have to say, like, we're good on the race issue. Like, if it's...
I know, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. Like, my stance on it is kind of... I don't think I have very many, if any at all, unconscious racial biases. However, I think that it is very unique to mine and your situation, having grown up in the context that we did, that we do not have those biases, and most people will have them. And there's nothing... You're not a terrible person for having those. But I think one thing that I didn't remember from kind of my personal life is I remember... So I'm going to use first names. Will from university. Black man, obviously. We were reasonably well acquainted with him as a university house. And I remember, I think you, me, and Scott probably in particular, we grew up around black people, and for us, someone being black was not a big issue. But then for Dylan, Jack, and Alex, they hadn't grown up around black people as much. And I remember, I think it was Alex in particular, who comes from Barnsley, white as snow, and he was like, it's so cool that we have a black friend. And that was the first moment in my life when I'd ever just encountered this idea of like, it's cool to have a black friend.
But yeah, that's the thing. It was just like every day. It's like you don't even
Yeah,
notice
and I think there's a difference between, kind of on a personal level, not noticing race, and because when we say, because we're kind of saying that we're race blind, but we're not really saying that. What we're saying is, for us,
exactly.
our experience. But when it comes to, for example, Star Wars, obviously we notice that there are different, where are the minority actors, and there's a difference between kind of what we want is everyone on a personal level should be kind of like, they shouldn't view being black as special, whether as in a positive way or a negative way, but they should view kind of the actual reality of what black people experience. What I want to ask you, and I guess you can ask me in turn, is going back to the point of this podcast. Do you think that this is worth a second watch? Do you think that this is worth, DVD, whatever? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it's a good movie to have if you want to, learn more about, race relations, and if you are white, and from our point of view, it's that it can be, I guess, educational, So there's that. But yeah, it's a really fun movie as well. It's like, it's really interesting, and it's mysterious, and it's written like quite well. Yeah, I'd say it's a great story. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. Give it like, I don't know if we're doing ratings out of 10, but like 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I would say definitely do watch it again first of all. And it's probably one of those films that I think I would like to watch with, like, introduce someone else to, especially if someone who you think maybe could benefit from seeing it, although those people do run a risk of not understanding the point of the film. But with regards to, for example, the DVD, or like buying it on DVD, I think, in my opinion, in terms of legacy, this film is not going to go down as a horror classic, and I think that's a shame, because I think this film has a really, really good point. It's really, really well made, but I think for some reason, and I don't know, maybe I'm just going to say I have a sixth sense about these things. I don't see this film going down with things like, John Carpenter's They Live, or even, the Night of the Living Dead. I don't see it going down as a classic.
Yeah, it's a film. No, it's a film, like, its legacy will be a film about race. A film about race relations, like I said. And, like, well, if we can look forward to the Oscars, which are coming, it'll be released in 13 days, I believe, the nominations for the 2017 Oscars. And obviously the Academy has been criticised in recent years for not having a lot of sort of black films, or films directed and starring, or black people in, the nominations. Like the Oscars are so white was, I remember that, a hashtag or something from a couple of years ago, and there was this great picture of like all the people who were nominated for Oscars. Maybe it was in 2015, and literally there was like one black person in, like, I don't know how many, couple of 100 people.
Yes.
So I'm thinking, the Academy maybe will want to, nominate this movie, because it is about race, and it is directed and starring, African American. Well, the guy is British, but obviously, but black, people. So I think, maybe we'll see in the coming, weeks, a lot of Oscar buzz. And maybe it doesn't get nominated for Best Picture, but because of
it'll get nominated for sound design.
Academy of
because it's a good film.
Yes. Because of the criticism the Academy Awards have received, it will definitely, I think, be nominated. Or maybe it won't, because it wasn't the Golden Globes, was it?
No.
So maybe. I mean, Hollywood. The thing in Hollywood now is sexism, not racism. So maybe the Academy will be focused on that instead of racism. They can't do two at the same time.
But I think, final point, like I said, I wish this film would have gone after millennials. I wish this film would have kind of gone under or got under Tumblr's skin and really been like, oh, you think, your tribal tattoo and your henna and your, converting to Islam because it's exotic. You think that's, makes you progressive. Look at this. And I think, and this is why I want to say that, because you brought up the possibility of a sequel. And you're talking about what you would like the sequel to be, going, I would love to see the sequel being, dealing with that, dealing with other, and also, and a final point, just for the third film, and something I want to see is kind of the idea of, people say like, oh, black people can get into colleges so easily, or, for example, black people can say the N-word, and I want to be able to say the N-word, that kind of thing. I would like to see, maybe, or even like people who are like, I want to be the samurai. Like, I'd like to see just this guy goes to a 4chan meetup, and and it's like, oh, now I'll get all the edgy waifus.
Jordan Peele, after he does a movie on how ignorant white people are of black culture or black people, he can then go on to do it about other cultures, how white people are ignorant of Asian culture, and so on and so forth. You can just keep on showing how ignorant white people are.
I hate white people. I think there's one message to get from this: is that white people suck and black people are awesome.
Yes.
No, of course the message is.
Well, the thing is, like,
people are people.
One minute. If they attacked millennials, it wouldn't really have worked, because the whole point of the movie is they're transplanting people's brains into like black people, because these people are old, they can't run maybe as fast as they could, and they're nearly dying or are blind, and millennials don't, obviously because they're young, they don't have the issues. They don't
that is actually the element in which it moves away from race slightly, and I noticed because
exactly. That's why it's not just about race relations. It's about
the guy who wanted Chris's body, for example, wanted it for the eyes. He didn't care about the race issue by his own admission. So I think it did. The horror elements made it not quite a purely kind of race issue, and I don't think that's necessarily a problem. But I think it could have done more. It could have done whatever. I think all in all, at the end of the day.
Well, I think that's what draws people in, though, because if it was just about the satire of race, without the horror element,
yes, it was. I think what I want is a smarter, less successful film. But yes, at the end of the day, it's very good, and I think I prefer to criticise. I think it's always, there's only so many times you can say a film's good, and you can point out problems a lot. I still really like the film, definitely worth a second watch. I'm more stingy with my ratings, and I'd maybe say like 8 out of 10, but that's just because for me, 9, 10 is. I mean, I definitely wouldn't say it's not a 6, and it's probably not even a 7. I'd say 8, maybe 9, but if you put a gun to my head, 8.
Yeah, I think 9 out of 10, because there's a few issues, obviously, like we discussed about how the characters are just really weird, and how does he not sort of get out quicker?
Get out.
Again. You can say that's
every time.
Yeah. But that's what you have to do when making a horror movie. You have to keep the character in that situation. But I think the movie's great. So yeah, definitely worth a second.
By the way, we didn't have time to discuss how you were, but I think we're not going to do that this time. Next time, I think we're not going to be talking for as much. I don't know what the next film's going to be, but I think we probably
we have talked for 1 hour and 40.
There was a lot to discuss, but yes, so I think good to talk to you, Luke. Thank you, to you, audience, all of you, the millions of you, and I hope you enjoyed it, and enjoy join us next time where we'll be talking about other important issues.
Yes, thank you for watching Select and Reflect.